Welcome, welcome, welcome to this Whole Life Action Hour. I am so glad you are here. I'm Ushin Robbins, co-founder of Food Revolution Network, and we are here today to talk about energy, how you can add zest and zip and zing and zazz to your life, how you can have bounce in your step and clarity in your mind and potency in your being, and have the energy you need to do what you love all day long. And we are here with a brilliant expert on health, vitality, wellness, and peak energy. His name is Ari Whitten, and I'm so happy to have this time with him. Tell you a little bit about Ari. He is an energy and fatigue specialist who focuses on taking an evidence-based approach to energy enhancement. For the last 6 years, Ari's been working with many of the top scientists and physicians on the planet to develop the most comprehensive program in the world on the science of overcoming fatigue and increasing energy. It's called the Energy Blueprint. He's helped over 100,000 people improve their energy levels, rescuing them from severe, debilitating chronic fatigue. He's also a nutrition and lifestyle expert with a bachelor's of science in kinesiology with specialization in exercise physiology. And he's recently completed his coursework for his PhD in clinical psychology. Ari has been studying nutrition for over 2 decades and is the best-selling author of Forever Fat Loss and The Ultimate Guide to Red Light Therapy. Ari, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, my friend. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here.
Well, thrilled to have you, absolutely. So let's just jump right in here and talk a little bit about energy. Now, big topic, right? But we're talking about how we have what it takes to sustain and thrive and show up for life. What do you see as the biggest destroyers of the vitality we all want?
Yeah, good question. A very big question. So I'm going to give kind of a quick overview of some of the biggest factors, and then we can go from there as far as delving into specifics of each one or whichever one you want to go into. So first of all, fatigue is an epidemic. It's rapidly growing. It's the most common health complaint when at doctor's visits in the United States today.
Wow.
And estimates range from, there's roughly around 10 million people with diagnosable chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. And that's just in the United States, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg, because there's also estimates that around between 1 in 3 to 1 in 2 people are dealing with chronic low-level fatigue or lack of energy or daytime sleepiness. And there's various kinds of measures and studies and surveys and ways that they've looked at this, like how often are you sleepy on the job? Do you feel chronic lack of energy? You know, that the other side of this equation is sleep. So there's often assessments of, are you chronically sleep deprived? And if you're chronically sleep deprived, you're also going to be excessively tired during the day. So it's really somewhere around probably 1 in 2 people that is dealing with some variation of either extreme or mild lack of energy. And so it is, as you said, a very big problem. The factors that drive this can be, there's a pretty wide array of different factors. So when we're dealing with something like chronic fatigue syndrome, these people typically have some kind of mix that's like, a common example might be the person's a very driven type A personality. They're, a workaholic, go. They're always in stress mode. They're chronically sleep deprived to some extent. And then they get hit with some big infection, and then they were just never the same after.
Yeah.
They never really recovered. Now, on the other hand, you might have someone who's just chronically stressed or chronically sleep deprived, and that in itself will cause chronic lack of energy. The way I kind of look at the framework of factors that influences energy levels is circadian rhythm and sleep is one big piece of the puzzle, and I would say that's the single most common cause of most people's lack of energy.
Yeah.
So circadian rhythm's big, and a lot of people really don't understand a lot of facets of it and exactly why it's so important. It's not just as simple as, get your 8 hours of sleep and then you're covered. Nutrition, huge factor. Movement and exercise, another huge factor. Light exposure, another huge factor. Gut health, brain health, and the way we operate our brain. both huge factors. Toxins, exposure to man-made environmental toxins is another huge factor. And then there's also something called hormesis, which is transient metabolic stressors that have a big impact on our mitochondrial health, these are the energy generators in our cells. So that's kind of the broad overview of factors, just to list them off. Each one of these topics is something we could talk about for 5 hours. But ultimately, the way I look at this is, if you have the symptom of fatigue, that means that your mitochondria are not pumping out energy very efficiently. Mitochondria, again, are the cellular energy generators. You are basically a collection of trillions of cells. And the vast majority, almost all of the energy that is supplying those trillions of cells, whether it's your brain cells, your heart, your internal organs, your skin, your muscles, everything in your body is coming from those mitochondria. So if you are feeling the symptom of, I don't have enough energy, that is, at the cellular level, a sign that those mitochondria are not pumping out enough. Now, there's various reasons why that might be the case. It could be they've incurred damage and they're dysfunctioning. It could be that you've lost mitochondria over time, and we can talk about the reasons why that happens. Or it could be just a shutdown of the mitochondria. So there's a physician that's really done groundbreaking work in this area named Dr. Robert Naviaux. He's a mitochondrial researcher, and he talks about something called the cell danger response, and why mitochondria are the hub of the wheel of our metabolism. They're not just these mindless energy generators that take in carbs and fats and pump out energy. They are exquisitely sensitive environmental sensors that are sensing what's going on around them and then determining whether to operate in peacetime metabolism, pump out lots of energy, or to shift resources away from energy production towards cellular defense. And that might be from a poor diet, poor circadian rhythm, poor gut health, poor brain health, exposure to toxins, chronic inflammation. All these factors that I just mentioned ultimately converge at the mitochondrial level, where they are shutting down mitochondrial energy production. And at the macro level, you feel that as the symptom of fatigue.
How does metabolism play into all this? Some people burn calories at a very different rate than others. Some people produce more body heat than others. Does that impact how we experience energy as well?
It's not a simple answer to this question. So first of all, metabolism can mean different things to different people. So metabolism is the entire process of, consuming and breaking down and metabolizing nutrients from your diet, and then your body's production of energy. Now, there's lots of layers of nuances to this. Depending on your ancestry, mitochondria can produce more or less heat, for example, as a byproduct. So, for example, if your ancestry is more from Africa or equatorial environments, those mitochondrial haplotypes, which is just a fancy word for like what kind of mitochondria and how do those mitochondria work, those tend to produce less heat, right? Because they're in environments where heat is not as necessary. So they produce more energy, less heat. If you're from ancestry like from Scandinavia and more northern or far southern latitudes, probably more northern latitudes in particular, you are going to have mitochondria that produce more heat and so on. So, but there's not a huge amount of science around that and like specifically saying, well, if you have this kind of mitochondria, you should alter your diet in this way or that way, or do more or less exercise. Or we don't really have that science built out yet to say specifics like that. As far as, here's what I think is the biggest factor. Genetically, certain people are wired for more or less. It's not even necessarily the resting metabolic rate per se. It is more what's called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And we know that genetically, we know this based on studies of identical twins, where they've looked specifically at this, and they've, for example, taken groups of identical twins and overfed them, intentionally given them more calories than their body needs.
Yeah.
Some people burn off that energy very efficiently. And they just as soon as they're being overfed, they just move more and they feel more energy and they just have a desire to move more. And so they spontaneously, non-consciously burn off hundreds of calories more per day and generally stay lean. And other people don't do that. They don't have this drive towards NEAT or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and they can consume lots more calories and then just stay just as sedentary as normal and not necessarily feel this overwhelming energy and desire to move their body. So those people just tend to accumulate the excess energy as body fat. So yes, there's some facets there, but on a practical level, I don't think it's useful for people to worry about, is my metabolism wired this way? And, how should that relate to, what steps I take?
Got it. Okay, thank you. We've got so many questions from participants of Whole Life Club, as well as things I want to ask you. So I'm going to ask you if you can try to keep your answers kind of on the short side, not because we don't want to open everything up wide, but because we want to cover as much of the macro terrain as we can here today. So you mentioned a few things. One of them was sleep. And let's talk about that for a second. There's nothing more stressful, I think, than being up in the middle of the night, stressing out about not getting enough sleep. We hear, get your 8 hours a night, but for a lot of people, that's easier said than done. Anyone who has ever been awake in bed when they didn't want to be knows how uncomfortable that can be. Sometimes after a stressful night, people wake up in the morning, they're like, well, thank God that's over. At least I can get on with my day, even if I'm blurry and exhausted. It's better than fighting nature. How do we get attuned to nature in a way that our nature pulls us? Because most of us have also had the experience of being so tired we can't keep our eyes open. And we just could fall asleep anywhere, like in the middle of Grand Central Station, because we're so tired. What is the difference? And how do we align with our circadian rhythms so that we are drawn into the kind of deep sleep that is most replenishing, so we can really let go, and then we can come back full and ready for the next day?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, the reason that it's not just as simple as get your 8 hours, boom, problem solved, there's a lot of facets to this, but one is the quality and the depth of your sleep, what's called sleep efficiency, is largely determined by your circadian rhythm habits. So in other words, somebody can sleep 8 hours. Two people can sleep 8-hour intervals. One person can have dramatically higher sleep efficiency, which means their sleep is much more regenerative and healing and restful to their body and recharges their energy levels in their body and brain much more efficiently than somebody else who spent the exact same amount of time in bed. So the goal is not just the amount of hours. The goal should be to have the habits that allow your brain to enter into these deep phases of sleep and spend as much time there as possible. So that's one layer of the story. And circadian rhythm, which is this biological clock built into our brain, this 24-hour clock that modulates our sleep and wake cycles, is a huge factor in influencing that sleep efficiency or sleep quality. So that clock is primarily controlled by light rhythms, but it's also impacted by meal timing. It's also impacted by movement timing and by temperature. So there's several different factors that influence the timing and the function of this clock, which ultimately determine your sleep quality. And since you can think of sleep and energy levels as two sides of the same coin. So the deeper your sleep, the greater energy you're going to have during the daytime. So and circadian rhythm is the link between those two things.
Yes.
So deep sleep and high levels of energy go together. So that's, I would say circadian rhythm is the thing to focus on. Now, one other reason why it's not just as simple as, 8 hours in bed, just consider this. People have heard of melatonin before, and everybody knows, melatonin is this kind of sleep hormone. Well, what most people don't know is that melatonin is also the most potent protector of your mitochondria that is in existence, basically. It's one of very few compounds that actually penetrates into your mitochondria in all the cells of your body and actually protects it from damage, and also interacts with this internal antioxidant defense system that produces glutathione and these other compounds that protect the mitochondria from damage, glutathione, superoxide dismutase, catalase in particular, and it recharges the internal defense system of the cell. It's an antioxidant defense system, anti-inflammatory defense system, and detoxification system. So ultimately, that protects the cell from damage. Now, just consider this: if you have exposure to artificial light at night prior to going to bed, you suppress your levels of melatonin by about 50%. So what happens if you were to suppress levels of this hormone that is so vital, not just for your sleep, but so vital for protecting your cellular energy generators by 50% every single night for years or for decades of your life? Well, ultimately you accumulate a lot of damage at the mitochondrial level and a lot of dysfunction, and those mitochondria don't produce as much energy. So this is one of the biggest driving factors of fatigue. But of course, that melatonin is also important for deep quality restful sleep as well. So yeah,
yeah. What do we do then? So are you recommending that we all turn off, don't use lights at night, or are you recommending that we dim them towards bedtime? Are you recommending to stay off blue light in particular?
Sure. So yeah, there's a few layers to this, but one simple intervention is wear blue blocker glasses, or ideally blue and green blocker glasses, because blue and green wavelengths of light are the primary wavelengths that enter the eyes and feed back into the circadian clock and basically give it the signal. It's daytime. It's the time to be awake, alert, active, and energetic. So blue blocker glasses, and that will allow you to still use your electronics and still have lights on in your house and things like that without actually being disturbed by them. Now, there's at least one other layer that I would say that is worth looking into here, which is changing the lighting in your house in the evenings. So what I recommend is incandescent bulbs, ideally like the old Edison style incandescent bulbs as a side bonus. They also look pretty cool and they're kind of fashionable now in restaurants and stuff. But they have a spectrum of light with very low amounts of blue and green light and lots of orange and red and infrared light. And turns out also the red and the infrared light are actually good for us to be exposed to at night because they actually help promote melatonin secretion. So, and the reason why is, from an evolutionary perspective, we're wired for exposure to firelight in the evenings. So those incandescent bulbs mimic that firelight, whereas standard, LED and fluorescent bulbs that most of us have in our house, and most electronic screens, TVs, computers, phones, things like that, are emitting lots of blue and very little red and no infrared. So the whole spectrum of light that we're getting in the evenings is totally at odds with what our circadian clock is actually designed for. And that circadian clock, again, regulates all these different hormones and neurotransmitters that impact on our mood, our brain function, our energy levels, and our sleep quality.
Yeah. A few other things I would mention. You can, most smartphones nowadays have an option to turn off the blue light or filter out the blue light at night, like a sleep mode or night mode scenario. And it can happen automatically based on the time zone of where you are, which your phone can probably tell. Certainly Apple has that. I think others do too. Flux is an application that you can get on your computer that will also change the light and make it less blue. And it can also be tied to time zone or time of day so that you don't have that at night. Or you can just straight up not use your devices in the evening. But if you, for some reason, need to, filtering out the blue can be a positive step. Yes. Also, I find it helpful not to jump on the phone first thing in the morning. It just helps my system to recognize that bedtime is for bed and bedroom is for sleep, not for work. And there's a difference. Also, once you're up and ready to go, step outside, get some sun if you can. Let your body know, wow, it is daytime. And that contrast, I think, can be helpful between day and night.
Yeah. So to speak to that, I specifically recommend people get outdoor bright light for at least 10 minutes after waking up, within 30 minutes of waking up. And to tie this back into artificial light at night, there's actually research showing that the more bright light exposure, ideally outdoor sunlight, you get during the daytime, the more resistant your brain is to the suppression of melatonin from artificial light at night. Yeah. So in other words, the bigger the differential between daytime light exposure and nighttime, the less that nighttime light exposure is going to affect you. Now, to comment just specifically on the switches on cell phones and computers, F-Lux, I do recommend those. However, it's important to understand they're not a complete solution. So if you're standing at your computer while it has efflux, you're minimizing the blue light. First of all, you're not eliminating it, you're minimizing it. But second of all, people are often doing that in a fluorescent lit room.
Right.
So the reason I don't emphasize that, and I emphasize the blue blockers, is because if you just talk about efflux or the night shift mode on your phone, people will be sitting in a fluorescent lit room looking at their phone or their computer thinking that they're blocking blue light, and they're not. So ultimately you're still going to get that melatonin suppressing effect, but those are nice things to do in addition to the steps I mentioned.
You mentioned earlier incandescent bulbs, and for those of us who are concerned about energy bills and saving the planet, that's a concern because they're not the most energy efficient. You also mentioned fluorescents just now, which are kind of known for their bluish hue. What about LED?
Yeah, so LEDs can come in different wavelengths with different spectrums, but they're going to be missing the infrared part of the spectrum. Necessarily, and that is basically why those things are more energetically efficient. So you have to understand that they're made energetically more efficient by cutting out the invisible part of the spectrum, invisible to the human eyes, this infrared, near infrared, and mid infrared and far infrared parts of the spectrum, and saying, oh, that's invisible to the human eye, therefore it's not necessary to create light. And that's true. And by cutting it out, it is also true that you can make them energetically more efficient. But here's the part that you miss. The infrared, although it's invisible, is bioactive. It has effects on our body. In particular, in this context that we're talking about, it has effects on promoting melatonin secretion. So you're cutting it out, and yes, you'll save a few bucks on your energy bill each month, and you'll pay for it later on in your medical bills, because we know that these forms of light are important to human health. So you have to decide where you want to pay. Do you want to pay a little bit more now for taking care of your health, for eating organic food and a gym membership and getting massages, getting chiropractic care, getting nutritional supplements, whatever, taking care of your health in natural ways? Or do you want to put all that stuff off because it costs money and decide, hey, I'll spend money when I'm sick later? I personally think it makes a lot more sense to spend money on taking care of your health now.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, or maybe a ton in some cases.
Indeed.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to get to some of the questions that have come in from our participants. And then these are Whole Life Club members who submitted questions in advance of this action hour. It's one of the benefits of being a member of Whole Life Club is that you get to submit questions. You also get the transcripts and follow-up action checklists from these action hours, and lots of other great resources, fabulous whole foods, plant-based recipes, and many other wonderful things. You can find out more on the broadcast page about that if you're interested. Chris said, I'd love to hear more about how to figure out your chronotype. I can't decide if I'm a dolphin or a bear in Ari's system. Since I started eating whole foods plant-based, food isn't as critical, but I still have issues with sleep and exercise. I wonder if this might be better fine-tuned into the when I do things category rather than the how I do them. Is it reasonable to apply the fixes and see which ones make the most impact? So Ari, you'll have to explain to us here, for those who don't know about chronotypes, what Chris is referring to, and if you have any feedback for Chris.
Yeah. So chronotypes essentially is whether the simplest way to think about it is whether you're more of a morning person or a night person. So a lark or a night owl. It can be classified into more complex, nuanced degrees. And that's what Chris is referring to here. That's not my system that he's referring to with the dolphin and bear, the lion and the wolf, I think are the other two animals. There might be one more. That's Dr. Michael Bruce's system. And he wrote the book, The Power of When, which is basically all about chronotypes. Now, having said this, it is true that some people are wired to be more night people or more morning people. And there might be some other aspects of this that are true. However, there is one giant, massive confounding variable here, which is that the modern world, from some of the factors that we've talked about, so the artificial light environment, the lack of outdoor exposure, there's also temperature factors that influence circadian rhythm, meal timing factors, social timing factors that all influence the circadian clock. All of these factors in the modern world have shifted all of us into a much later rhythm then pretty much we should all be into, for the most part. Okay, there's some exceptions, but most people have been shifted into a circadian rhythm that is 2 to 4 hours later than it should be, and out of sync with the rise and fall of the sun. So I'll give you a specific example to point to this. There was a study just a few years ago that took a bunch of self-proclaimed night owls. These are the kind of people, there's probably a lot of people like this listening to this right now who will say, you know, I go to bed every night at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. and I've just always been this way, and I'm a night owl and I do my best stuff at night. They took a bunch of people like that and they basically sent them on a camping trip for a week. They said no artificial light, no phones, no computers, no indoor lighting, no street lights, no car lights. Go camping in nature. You have firelight and that's it. Okay. And what happened to these people was all these people who were used to going to bed at 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. started going to bed within a few days. They started to go to bed at 10 p.m. and wake up at 6 a.m. Okay. They still slept the same amount of hours, but they shifted their entire rhythm several hours earlier. And this is not a mistake. It's basically showing us that when you are actually living with the right inputs, truly natural inputs into your system, into your circadian clock, that is the rhythm that most people will assume. Now, there's still a spectrum, a range of people who are more morning people or more night people. But what I think is that these people who are convinced that their optimal bedtime is 2 or 3 a.m., probably their optimal bedtime is like midnight or 11:30 or 11, maybe 10 in some cases. And then there's also people who may have an optimal bedtime. They go to bed at 10:30 right now, and maybe their optimal bedtime is 9, you know? And so I think, yes, there's a range, but everybody's been shifted like 2 or 3 or 4 hours later than they should be, and later than is optimal for their ideal sleep quality and brain function and energy levels.
Yeah, absolutely. We heard from Elizabeth, who said, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism 2 years ago. No autoimmune issues. Currently on Armour. I sleep well, sleep study done, exercise regularly, and my diet is the best it's ever been. But I still experience constant fatigue to the point I have to push myself to get through basic daily activities. Any advice? I'm so tired of being constantly tired.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of advice. I mean, I would say I basically always start people with circadian rhythm. You know, that's pretty much a universal. Now, we covered a few strategies. There's literally 37 strategies that I cover in my Energy Blueprint program. So there's a lot more we could talk about just strategies there. I mentioned there's temperature inputs, meal timing inputs, things like that. So for example, to name one meal timing input that feeds into the circadian clock, maybe I'll name a couple here. We know that the feeding and fasting windows impact on the function of your circadian clock. So having too long of a feeding window, which most people have, even people who may be eating good quality food. So this kind of story is very common. People will say, I'm eating a great diet, I'm exercising, why am I not losing weight? Or why don't I feel good? And the answer is very simple. There's a dozen other factors that you're probably not even aware of that you're not doing optimally. And so it's usually that simple. So feeding and fasting windows, it's been shown that most people in the United States have between 14 to 16 hour feeding windows each day. Okay, so most people are eating almost from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. We know this is not optimal for a few reasons. One is that it disturbs the function of the circadian clock. The same as if you get light for too long a period during the day, that disturbs the circadian clock. Well, meal timing, food, is also a factor that influences your circadian clock. If that's too long a period during the day, that disturbs and blunts that circadian rhythm, hinders sleep quality, hinders energy levels. Okay. Another factor is autophagy. We know that we need adequate fasting periods each night while we sleep for our cells to undergo this process of recycling, breaking down and recycling all the dysfunctional cell parts and rebuilding new healthy cell parts. And if you don't spend enough time in a fasted state during the night, you don't do that very well. There's also another aspect of this called mitophagy, which is the mitochondrial aspect of autophagy. It's where the mitochondria rebuild these broken down cell parts and rebuild new healthy mitochondria. obviously very important for your cellular energy production. So if you're chronically deficient in doing that, you're going to be chronically deficient in energy levels. Another aspect of this is that we know that eating too close to bedtime and having too long of a feeding window, but especially eating too close to bedtime, also disturbs parasympathetic activity during the night. So it shifts you more into a sympathetic dominance and doesn't allow your autonomic nervous system to shift out of the fight or flight mode quite as well, and to shift into rest and digest relaxation mode, which is where you want to be during sleep. So we know that literally eating too close to bedtime is disturbing your nervous system and your brain's ability to get out of that go, go, go mode that it's in all the time during the day. So meal timing is very important for circadian rhythm function. And I bring this up just to give people a sense that we talked a little about circadian rhythm, but just that one factor is something we could talk. There's 30 other strategies we could talk about. There's 30 other things that we're doing wrong. So one other factor I'll mention is temperature. It's been shown in sleep studies of hunter-gatherers that temperature is actually a big factor in their sleep. So if you're not sleeping in the right temperature, but also if you're not sleeping in the right temperature, it disturbs your sleep quality, but also the temperature drop in the evening, in the couple hours before bed, is actually a signal to the circadian clock that it's bedtime.
Yeah.
Cooling off the body rapidly can help you sleep deeper and can help entrain the circadian clock. The same thing in the morning in the opposite direction. The rise in temperature is a big factor in what helps entrain the circadian clock. And the problem is, kind of similar to the artificially lit world we now live in, is that we now live in man-made climate-controlled environments too, where we're separated from the rise and fall of the temperature. And so we don't have these factors, these natural factors in training our circadian clock. But if you have this knowledge, then you can replicate it. You can engineer these things back into your life.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Jumping to a whole other question from Patricia. She said CBD oil is being marketed as a daily supplement. What does research say regarding the appropriate or most beneficial use?
Yeah, there's a whole range of uses and doses. People use it for pain. People use it for migraines. People use it for treating cancer. People use it for just general anti-inflammatory, brain protection. Yeah, there's a pretty wide variety of uses that people are using it for. I think the hype exceeds the value right now. I do think it's a useful, valuable supplement. It has proven neuroprotective properties, has some anti-cancer properties. Some people find it really useful for sleep or for pain management. But I think it's been hyped as kind of a panacea. And I don't think it's that. I've used it. I noticed some beneficial anti-stress effects. To get sleep benefits, most of the sleep studies that have shown benefit use pretty high doses. And this is something to be aware of, because a lot of people using CBD supplements that have doses of like 5 to 10 milligrams. Most of the sleep studies use doses that are close to 100 milligrams each evening before you sleep. So in many cases, depending on the supplement somebody's taking, this might be like 20 pills,
Yeah.
It's a pretty big dose. And I've also seen research that just came out that showed decreases in testosterone levels and sperm motility in men who are taking it. So, I think like everything else, this is not a free lunch. I think that it's not a panacea. Then the more you take, the better it is. I think there's probably some downsides. At the same time, there's some benefits. But if you have pain, if you have sleep problems, if you have migraines, maybe if you have cancer, I think it's definitely a good compound that's well worth looking into.
Yeah, thank you. Tracy said, I've heard that HIIT is a great way to increase energy and endurance. Can you address the research, especially for older adults?
Yeah. So high intensity interval training is definitely useful. There's tons of positive research showing benefits, not just for fat loss, but for brain health, certainly for energy levels and mood enhancement as well. Within the realm of exercise, the most beneficial type for energy enhancement has been shown in general to be endurance exercise or aerobic exercise, which I'm more of a weightlifter, speed, power person, as far as my types of exercise and physical activity I do. So I've never gravitated towards that type of exercise, but speaking purely in terms of the research, that's what shows the biggest mood and energy benefits in terms of one's subjective state of energy. But I also have seen some reports subjectively in more anecdotally in my energy blueprint community of people who have actually noticed the best benefits from weight training, especially men. I think there's something kind of primal about weight training that just like makes you feel like, raw, like it kind of just, it just gives you this good feeling of like accomplishment. And I don't know, I think there's something primal about it that probably causes an energized state for at least.
I work out at the gym together a couple times a week, and we literally bellow. I mean, there's nowhere else in life that I do that, but I just feel permission to just grunt and I know something's going on in my system. It's probably letting out a lot of stress too.
Yeah, totally. But, all three of these types of exercise, endurance exercise, high intensity interval training, and weight training all have a lot of value. It's not, you should only do one to replace the others. I'd say ideally you have a program that encompasses all three. I do some endurance training. I surf, I rock climb. So I get kind of forms of endurance training and high intensity interval training. And then when I go to the gym, I primarily weight lift. And then I also go for long walks, which is some degree of cardio. So that's my mixture of kind of all those activities. And I think whether you're into dancing or bike riding or Pilates or yoga or whatever, you want to just also try to incorporate some other types of activity as well.
Yeah, thank you. Hester said, hello, I'm very happy with all the action hours. I'd like to know whether or not it's good to go to bed for a while in the afternoon when I'm tired.
Yeah.
Thoughts on naps?
This is really an individual thing. I have no opposition to naps. I'm personally not a napper, but speaking in terms of the research overall generally shows napping to be a beneficial thing. It's associated with actually protection and lower risk of a number of diseases. But it seems, again, to be a very individual thing. Some people are just nappers and some are not. The one caveat that I would say here is if you're using napping to make up for lack of sleep at night, then you're doing it wrong. Okay. What you should prioritize is get good quality sleep at night, have adequate time sleeping, and optimize your circadian rhythm habits. Then once you've done that for a couple weeks or a few weeks, if you still feel a desire to nap in the afternoons, then maybe you're just wired that way. Some people are, and do it. And there's zero problem with napping. You shouldn't feel bad about it or like it's harming you in any way. It's perfectly fine. And then other people, once they're getting adequate sleep at night, they won't feel that crash in the afternoon or that desire to nap. And that's also perfectly fine.
I find that one of my special treats is an afternoon nap in the sun. Mm-hmm. I live in California where we get nice, where I live is on the coast. So we get, it kind of sun comes out in the midday. Mm-hmm. It's not too hot. And I just love maximal skin exposure for like 15 minutes. And I've really refreshed by that. I don't know if it's good for my circadian rhythms or not, but I'm certainly getting a full experience that it's daylight and my body is resting into that.
Yes.
Any thoughts on how the sun might be affecting me at such a time?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that's the ideal way to do naps. That's how I don't usually fall asleep, but I usually go out in the afternoon and lay down and sunbathe and usually listen to a podcast. And I'm kind of in a almost napping state, but usually awake. Yeah. So yes, light is a huge story. There's 5 different bioactive wavelengths of light. We have blue light, which primarily impacts on circadian rhythm. We have UV light. Most people know the story with vitamin D to some extent already. We know that vitamin D is synthesized in our skin and responds to ultraviolet light, but there's more. We get actually a lot more from ultraviolet light. We also get cholesterol sulfate, which helps build charge on our red blood cells and build something called zeta potential that helps our red blood cells basically like magnets of the same polarity, how they repel each other. So the red blood cells, when they build negative charge on them, they repel each other better, which means they spread out instead of clumping together, and they can deliver oxygen more efficiently through the body to the cells, to the mitochondria that way. That cholesterol sulfate is built, again, through ultraviolet exposure. We also know that ultraviolet exposure modulates something called the melanocortin system, which has a huge impact on modulating inflammation, modulating the immune response, appetite and metabolism as well. So actually it has an impact on how much you eat and how much fat you lose. We know that sunlight also contains red and near infrared light, which is something I've written a book about, which directly interacts, those photons of light actually penetrate through the skin, inches into our body where they interact directly with mitochondria, and they increase mitochondrial energy production. They also have an anti-inflammatory effect, and they create basically gene expression in those target tissues that promote cellular regeneration. So we know that these wavelengths of light can penetrate actually through our skull into our brain, and where they modulate brain-derived neurotrophic factor and nerve growth factor. They can penetrate into our muscles where they increase IGF-1 and locally in those cells only, not systemically, and increase protein synthesis and increase other growth factors of muscle tissue. And they do this through all the different tissues. So also locally in the thyroid gland itself. So they can improve thyroid hormone levels and decrease, if you have, in the context of like autoimmune destruction of the thyroid gland, they actually modulate immune function. So the immune system is not attacking the thyroid gland as aggressively. So you can see decreases in thyroid antibody levels and things like that. So you get, and then, well, one other layer to the story is there's also a direct neurotransmitter effect. So it modulates serotonin and dopamine and another neurotransmitter called orexin. That's our primary wakefulness and energy neurotransmitter. So there's direct impacts on mood, energy levels, sleep quality from circadian rhythm, inflammation. You're modulating growth factor gene expression. You're modulating how the blood is delivering oxygen to the tissues. There's a whole range of effects. This is actually the next book that I'm writing, is going to be on all those different mechanisms of how light affects us. Because right now we have the story of the only thing people think is vitamin D. Right. That's the only layer of the light story that people are aware of. And then on top of that, people think that you can replace all of the benefits of sun by just popping a vitamin D pill. And no. There's a whole bunch more of this story of how light affects us that goes way beyond just vitamin D, and that cannot be replaced with a vitamin D pill.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We have lots of questions, and I know we don't have you for that much more time. So let's try to see how many of these we can get to. Yep. Rosalind said, do you recommend any supplements to increase energy, and how one can maintain energy levels throughout the day? Well, let's just focus on the supplements piece, because the second piece of that question is one we're kind of addressing. Any thoughts on that? And also, while we're at it, could you please comment on supplemental melatonin, since you were talking about the benefits of naturally produced melatonin earlier?
Yeah, supplemental melatonin is actually a tricky one. There's a lot of positive research on it, actually. But despite that, I'm not a huge fan of it, because I just see so many cases where it just causes grogginess the next day, or doesn't make people feel good, or doesn't actually improve sleep quality. But there is quite a bit of positive research on it. So this is one area where I'm not totally sure what to think. Usually my views are very in line with the research. In this case, it's not.
I will say that I think there's also some research that people who use it produce less over time of their own.
That is the case generally with most hormonal systems, but actually the research that's tested it has shown that it's generally not the case. They've shown that even big doses of melatonin don't seem to suppress endogenous melatonin production. That's what the research shows. I think it's probably not true. I think that what you said is actually probably the truth. They just haven't shown it yet in the research, because I have heard a lot of stories of people taking it and then having difficulty sleeping without it, which to me suggests that it is causing that effect. So yeah, I don't have a strong position on melatonin. Some people like it. For me, it's more about increasing your brain's own production of it. That's the most important thing. As far as other supplements, there's a few dozen supplements that have value in different contexts. We already covered CBD as one potential supplement with some benefits. There's things like acetyl L-carnitine. There's things like alpha lipoic acid. There's different herbs like Bacopa monnieri that can benefit brain function, ginkgo biloba, ginseng. Many of these things have direct effects on the mitochondria. Rhodiola rosea can modulate neurotransmitter levels in the brain. There's a pretty wide variety of supplements that have value. There's one called NT Factors. This is one of the key ingredients in my personal mitochondrial formula. And there's research on it showing reductions of about 35 to 40% in ratings of fatigue within a matter of, there's like 8 different studies on it, different groups of fatigued people. But about 35 to 40% reductions in ratings of fatigue between 4 weeks to 12 weeks in most of these studies. So huge increases in energy just from this one ingredient. And it's basically a phospholipid formulation that helps replace damaged phospholipids in your mitochondria. That's sort of the membrane around the mitochondria, and it can accumulate damage. And so if you can replace those damaged parts of the membrane with healthier phospholipids, then you can improve mitochondrial energy production. So there's a lot of supplements that have potential value. Supplements is a huge category of thousands of compounds, and a lot of them have no value.
Right.
And some of them are even potentially dangerous. So you do need to know what you're doing, and you do need to take things in the right dosage. But yeah, those are a handful of supplements that I mentioned there that I think have value.
Okay, thank you. Karen said, I have a good friend in her late 70s who's been battling breast cancer treatments, including mastectomies. What can she do to regain her energy and vitality? Any particular thoughts for somebody in that situation?
I don't know that as far as the cancer specific aspect of it, I don't know that I really want to comment on it because it gets into medical advice there.
Which we are not giving. I didn't say that at the beginning, but just to be clear, this is all coaching and our own best insights. None of this is medical advice. Always consult with your qualified healthcare professional and your own best judgment for the decisions pertaining to your health.
Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned CBD has some anti-cancer properties. There's also other natural herbs with anti-cancer properties, things like curcumin or turmeric. Garlic is a food that has some anti-cancer effects. There's a number of other foods. Obviously, eating a plant-based diet is going to be huge. Many different phytochemicals have anti-cancer, pro-apoptotic effects in cancer cells. The feeding and fasting windows, I think, are critical. There's actually research showing that shorter fasting windows increase rates of breast cancers in women specifically. So I think controlling those fasting windows are key. Going back to circadian rhythm, we also know that circadian rhythm disruption creates increased risks of breast cancer. So really taking control of your circadian rhythm and your sleep makes a huge difference. I would say those two are the biggest ones for cancer-specific related fatigue.
Okay, thank you. We had Dawn asking, in terms of the biggest needle movers for improving energy levels, what's the most effective type of exercise and your number one diet or nutrition recommendation? We've probably already kind of touched on these, but let's actually just focus on the diet or nutrition piece.
Okay.
You just touched on that a little bit, but let's go a little deeper.
Okay.
What's the top insights you would give for people who want to use food to increase energy levels?
Yeah, well, I would say the foundation is your meals should be composed of the majority by volume plant foods. So, and ideally you want colorful plant foods rich in phytochemicals. Those phytochemicals actually interact with your mitochondria in a way that's, I mentioned hormesis earlier. Many of these phytochemicals are what are called exercise mimetics, or there's a whole field of research called xenohormesis, which is basically around how different phytochemicals they act as a transient stressor, as a transient poison to mitochondria. But the mitochondria are well equipped to deal with that and actually respond to it by creating beneficial adaptations that make them bigger and stronger and have more robust antioxidant defense systems that make them more resilient and more capable of producing energy. So that's the foundation. Plant foods also interact with our energy levels through a variety of other mechanisms. They support gut microbiome health. You get these many bugs in the microbiome actually break some of these compounds, some of these fibers down into things like butyrate. Butyrate interacts directly with our brain to produce a neurotransmitter I mentioned before called orexin, which is our primary wakefulness and energy neurotransmitter. So you can get those direct effects from that. Obviously, minimizing processed junk is huge. Protein is another factor that will boost orexin levels. And protein can be modulated in different ways depending on your goals. So if you're, an athlete and a weightlifter and you're really physically active and looking to build muscle, you'd want to increase it. And if you're looking for longevity and disease prevention, you might go a little lower, but you still really want adequate protein levels to support energy production. And that doesn't have to be animal foods. You can get plant protein sources very easily, especially now there's even plant protein powders that certain companies make. So if you wanted to get more, but you're purely vegan, you have that option as well. So we could obviously talk a lot more about nutrition, but in the interest of getting a couple more questions in here, I'll shut up.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for what you're sharing, not for shutting up, just to be clear. Ardith said, I've heard varying opinions on consuming fat in the diet and not consuming fat. Can you comment on this topic?
I think it's
obviously a big one. Fat is a macronutrient. There are good fats and bad fats. Yeah. What's your high level take on fat?
The short answer, it's the wrong focus to focus on fat. You can have a diet that's 40% fat, 50% fat, or a diet that's 10% fat and still be healthy. The right thing to focus on is where are those dietary fats coming from? Are they coming from things like walnuts and avocados and shellfish, seafood, or are they coming, if you're an omnivore, or are they coming from refined oils and processed foods? And you can have the same amount of fat, the same percentage of fat in the diet by calories, and totally different effects. There's also certainly some research pointing in the direction that too much saturated fat, maybe especially saturated fat from animal foods, can be harmful, especially in the context of cardiovascular disease risk. So I do think it's worth not going overboard with saturated fats. The whole topic of coconut oil saturated fats is still a mixed bag. I think we need more research. I think some people, there's smart people on both sides of that debate. So I haven't made a strong position on that one. But yeah, I think if you focus on good quality food sources of the fats, then I really wouldn't worry about it. Just if you're eating whole foods that you don't have a lot to think about it, you're not going to eat whole foods and then arrive at a diet that's 70 or 80% fat. So by definition, eating that whole foods diet and focusing on good sources of fat, you've pretty much taken care of all of the whole issue there.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I want to, we had one other question actually from Susan, who said, how much time should elapse between eating and exercising? And is there a particular favorite food you consume to enhance your workouts?
Yeah, depends on what type of exercise you're doing. So if you're doing endurance exercise, you may want to wait a little while afterwards. If you're doing weight training and your goal is to build lots of muscle, there is definitely something to be said for consuming food very close to finishing that workout. Now, you probably want at least some transition period. You don't want to finish your last set of your workout and then start shoving food into your mouth, because ideally you want to get your body into a state of relaxation, get out of that sympathetic nervous system dominance, and allow the blood flow to change from being directed towards your muscles to being directed towards your internal organs. So transition, it might only be 5 to 10 or 15 minutes. If you can do some breathing exercises or some meditation to calm yourself down for at least a few minutes after your workout, and then consume some food that's maybe rich in some protein or carbs, that's ideal fuel for muscle growth. If you're doing cardio or endurance exercise, you might even stay fasted. I mean, you could be fine not eating for 2 hours following that, or 3 hours. So I think there's lots of different ways of doing it. I think the biggest key is, what is your goal and what type of exercise are you doing?
Yeah. Thank you, Ari. Well, so I know you have to go. I'm going to stay on. We have a couple more questions we didn't get to with you that I will address. But I want to thank you so much for your wisdom and your insight and your your clarity in sharing it all with us. And if people want to connect with you, they can, what's the best way to do that?
Well, my website's theenergyblueprint.com. And
Okay.
If people want to go check that out, there's also, a lot of free information there, free webinars and masterclasses and things like that.
All right. Ari Whitten, theenergyblueprint.com, energy expert and brilliant person and dear friend. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Ocean. Really a pleasure.
All right. And for everyone staying on with me, as Ari has to go now, Martha said, I'm interested in getting more green vegetables in my husband's diet since he's received post-surgical diagnosis of aggressive cancer growth. He really doesn't like broccoli or kale. Do you have any helpful advice for a vegan who doesn't like most greens? Well, here's the thing. Everybody knows eat more greens or eat more greens, but a lot of us aren't doing it. And so why is that? And what can we do? Well, there are some tips, and I'll share a few of them now. One is to cook creatively. Try different ones, try different types. Go to an Asian market sometime. You'll find probably some greens you don't usually include in your diet. Give them a try. See if you can find some new ones that you like and new ways of cooking them that you like. You can add them to everything. You can add greens to lasagna. You can even add greens to your breakfast cereal. It might sound crazy, but you can just experiment. Try sticking some greens in different things that you might not normally do, including chopping them up small or even blending them and mixing them on into pasta sauce and all sorts of stuff. You can feature them. Make them the center of your plate instead of a side dish. Make greens the center, and you can, for example, use pasta sauce, and instead of putting it over spaghetti, put it over some slices of zucchini or eggplant or other kinds of vegetables. Feature them in the center of your plate. Grow them. People find that when folks grow vegetables, they're more likely to eat those vegetables. And that's true of kids, but it's true of people of all ages. So growing food can be a fabulous thing to do to encourage yourself to be more connected to food. And there's nothing as delicious as homegrown veggies. You can steam them, of course. That's the way a lot of people eat vegetables. But some folks forget that you can eat a lot more when it's steamed than when it's raw, for example. So a good mix of raw and steamed is ideal. But definitely steam away. And also chop them up and mix them into lots of different things. So those are a few tips. There are lots of others. Keep experimenting, keep trying, check out some new stuff, and realize that, that learning to love greens can take a bit of time. It can be a bit of an acquired habit, but it's worth acquiring it. There is new research coming out showing that saliva changes and that actually not everyone experiences greens in the same way. To some people, kale, for example, tastes bitter. To other people, it tastes sweet. So what's the difference? Partly it's the saliva. There are over 1,000 proteins in your saliva. And when your body gets used to kale, for example, 5, 6, 10, 20 times of eating it, your saliva will change and it will actually start to taste sweeter to you. This is actually borne out by scientific research. And so sometimes it takes a while to acquire the habit. So keep at it. Keep experimenting. Some people feel like they kind of have to grimace to get through their greens. Add some seasonings can help too. Some spices, some flavors. Umeboshi vinegar is interesting on greens. A little sweetness and some nice salt. Very tasty. We have our own homemade family salad dressing that we make. It's a tahini dressing. We add that to our greens. Our kids love to dip their greens in that. They literally will have a little bowl of dressing and they'll take a leaf of kale, freshly steamed, dip it in there and munch away. Especially if there's a little crunch and it's sort of al dente, makes it all the better. So enjoy, experiment, play, and see what you can do. I think that gets us through all of the questions that were submitted for this action hour, and we're also at time. So I just want to thank you so much for being here. And I want to let you know, for those of you who are Whole Life Club members, I want to thank you for being a part of this community. It is thriving and growing. Please post and share your comments, your reflections, your insights from this action hour. What have you gotten from it? What questions has it stirred? How are you applying some of these principles in your life, and how is it impacting you? For everybody else, if you're interested in joining Whole Life Club, we want to welcome you. We want to let you know this is an incredible community, and it's all about applying what we're learning about food and health and our whole life wellness and making it happen. And it's about continuity, sustaining, because you know what? It doesn't matter at the end of the day how much you know, or how much you read, or how many action hours you attend. It matters what you eat and how you live. And Whole Life Club is all about creating that continuity, that consistency to get you results. So you can find out more about it on our broadcast page or go to WLC, that's WLC.foodrevolution.org/poll and join on in. Look forward to seeing all of you in the food revolution as we carry forward and create healthy, ethical, and sustainable food for all. Thanks so much for joining us, and I wish you a fabulous, energized, beautiful day. Blessings, and let's do this. When it comes to cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic illness, what really matters isn't how many books you read, how many webinars you attend, or how much you know. What really matters at the end of the day is what you eat and how you live. The science has given us what we need to know. Now it's time for action. It's time to implement and optimize your healthy lifestyle. It's time to get results. It's time to say goodbye to confusion and hello to clarity. It's time to say goodbye to bad habits and hello to good ones. It's time to fall in love with foods that love you back. It's time to join a community that will support you in achieving your goals. It's time for Whole Life Club. Click the link to find out more and to join in now.